was it? I think it was actually, I'll cut this out because I've forgotten what it actually was. It was something quite not so nice. I think
Oh,
it
what
was,
it was actually. Oh, you
yeah.
mean it wasn't beef heart? Oh,
No, no, I'll cut this bit out because I'm just trying to remember what it
okay.
was because it was really not very pleasant. So I defrosted this beef heart. Everybody's getting excited about eating it. Well, at least our son is, and I'm getting excited, and perhaps his friend. And it turned out not to be a beef heart at all. It was actually beef kidneys. And I wasn't ready to cook kidneys because it's a different kind of preparation and things. And I wasn't really in the mood for kidneys. So labeling is very, very important. These were just things that were in saran and chucked into the,
Yeah,
wrapped in Ziplocs and in the freezer. So I found
yeah,
recently, I think I'm actually quite meticulous with my labeling these days and have been for a few years, ever since that
yeah.
little uh, trip
Well,
with the beef heart.
freezer and pantry, I think, are things that we don't think
Yes.
could go bad or there's not a shelf life. And there is. I mean, even in the pantry, there are shelf lives where things either lose flavor, they get stale.
Yeah.
In freezer burn. So, I mean, it's not a lifelong,
Yeah.
way to keep things. So, yes, labeling and just organizing and going through it, maybe once a month to understand what you have or before you do your shopping list can be really helpful. Make sure that you're using it and again, not wasting what, especially if it's something you prepared. I mean, you took all the time, you cooked it, like, why not enjoy it?
When you're talking about the kitchen detox, it makes me think about how few people go through their kitchen and throw out spices, thinking that spices last forever. I guess when you do these kitchen detoxes with your clients, spices is one thing that you do check, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you buy spices in bulk, which a lot of people do,
Yes, yeah,
it's just, you want to date them. Or if you buy a spice, you can write like an open date on the bottom,
yeah,
because, those things are helpful. Yeah. Because it's like, if, we use salt, pepper, maybe garlic salt, there you have your spices that you use regularly, but then maybe rosemary or, poultry seasoning. It's something you use once a year at Thanksgiving. Those are important. And I think buying spices in bulk is a small, answer to that is you can buy a tablespoon of something. A lot of the stores have bulk spices
yeah.
now. And so you can buy like a tablespoon or two so that you just use what you need and buy it as you need.
I think our bulk store would look at anyone who is doing that a little bit strangely because I've never seen anyone just buy little teaspoons of things, but maybe it's different in the States. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, I guess it depends on the judgmental qualities of your
Right, 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 right.
cashier.
So I was looking through your notes here and you mentioned spend 1 hour prepping. What does that mean exactly?
So one of the complaints or one of the pushbacks I get about prepping is like it just takes so much time
Right.
and I don't have a whole day to plan all my meals. And I think that if you give yourself an hour, you would be shocked
How
at
much you
what
can,
you
yeah, yeah.
could prepare. And so ideally you would do this, after you went to the store, like before you even put everything away, you can spend an hour prepping. And so by prepping, I mean like maybe chopping vegetables, um, cooking proteins, like grilling some chicken or prepping. I mean, there's some proteins you're not going to cook a steak before you eat it, but there's some proteins that you definitely could cook ahead of time. Or even like cooking a pot of rice or some grains and having them prepped. So anything you can do in that hour. And then I also recommend, unless you have the time and you're going to have like a meal, you can definitely put it together. But a lot of times, just prepping the vegetables or the individual pieces and having them stored that way
Sure.
makes meal preparing so much more inviting. I mean, I love cooking, but sometimes I look at a head of cauliflower, I'm like, I just don't have the
Yeah, that's a
time
lot of work.
to
Yeah.
hack it
Yeah.
up. So if it's chopped up for me and I can just grab it and put it in something, the invitation to cook is a lot more enticing. So just spend an hour and see what you can get ready for the meals. And again, I would challenge you to start small. So you don't need to plan a whole week if you've never planned anything before. plan maybe 2 dinners, or, a couple dinners and a couple breakfasts, or something where that seems manageable and it's actually helpful for you. But that hour will save you 3, 4, 5, tenfold, like throughout the week, having not, just the mental
Sure.
stress of like, what am I going to do and how am I going to approach it? But also just, the time in putting something together.
You mentioned rice there, and quite often at the beginning of the week, I'll get the rice cooker out, make some rice, or prepare some grains and put them in the fridge. But I keep it for a reasonable length of time. What are the rules regarding grains and rice and how long you can keep them in the fridge for after cooking them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think too, even with veggies and
Yeah.
produce, and even chopping and preparing, there's timelines that you want to keep in mind. So with grains, I will usually go like 4 to 6 days.
Yeah.
That's something that it usually works for me. So with that in mind, you want to look ahead and be like, okay, can my family eat this amount
Mm.
of rice or quinoa or whatever you're making in that amount of time? You can always freeze it too. You just got to label it and date
Yeah.
it. But that's something too that, will thaw out pretty easily too, grains.
It's interesting because there are some, I'm not sure if they're old wives' tales, but in more conservative newspapers and magazines, they say you can't store rice. You have to throw it out if you don't eat it on the first night. But I mean, I'm 52 now, and I haven't had any stomach pains from eating rice that's 4 days old or 5 days old.
Yeah, we've never had problems with it
Okay.
either. So I mean, I'm not, speaking as the FDA
Yeah,
or
no,
Food
no, I
Safety
get it. I get
Commission,
it.
but that has worked for us. We've had no problem storing that
Interesting.
in a way. And with vegetables, you want to be like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, like those things are pretty easy to chop up.
Mm,
Things like cucumbers, I would only chop those if you're going to use them maybe in a
sure.
day or
Yes. Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
And like avocado, potatoes, I wouldn't pre-chop at all, just because it's like if you don't cook them right away or use them right away, they're not good. So you
Yeah.
figure out what works, but having the items that you can have prep, it's such a game changer, I think.
Now, I've always been a huge fan of batch cooking, and some people shirk at the whole idea of batch cooking. But how do you go about batch cooking? How do you plan all of that? I happen to love cooking, so I'll open a bottle of wine and batch cook all afternoon.
Yeah. I think if you're going to make something, if you have that desire and
Yes.
it's exciting to you and helpful to you and you
Yeah.
see it as beneficial and productive, to spend an afternoon or a day batch cooking, so it's like everything's in the fridge, everything's in the freezer, like go for it. But as you're cooking, if you're making meals that already, just double or triple the
Yeah.
batch. So if you're making chili, if you're making soup, if you're making a casserole, that's what I think could be most helpful is make 3 times the recipe of
Yeah.
soup. You have one in the fridge, for maybe 3 days from now, and one in the freezer for,
Exactly. Yeah.
weeks down the road, when inevitably our schedules get crazier than they are this week, which, seems like the most crazy, and then it can get worse. So that's what I mean. Like, batch cooking is cook more if you can at the time that you're already making, because it
Sure.
doesn't really take much more time to make a double batch of chili than it does to make it twice. Like
Exactly.
it's,
Exactly.
yeah. So that's I think just something to keep in mind if you can double or triple. And there's some recipes like soups, stews, chilies, casseroles, like they freeze really well.
Yeah.
There's some things you wouldn't want to make,
Sure.
ahead, but if you can and you see that as a possibility, I would encourage you to do that.
A few of the dishes that I tend to batch cook are things that are a real pain in the backside to make or very messy in one's kitchen. So for me, that would be lasagna,
Yeah.
um, fish pie, less messy, but the uh, cottage pie and shepherd's pie for me.
Hmm.
And those kind of things, because those freeze very, very well.
Yeah.
Another thing I was reading about, and I'd never heard of this before, in the UK, people have toasties, which are toasted sandwiches, but
Hmm.
they were recommending that one makes toasted sandwiches and then puts them in the freezer. So I guess you get your bread, you slice and then freeze it. And I'd never thought of that before. Is that something that you've heard of doing?
What is in the sandwich? Like
It would be ham and
maybe,
cheese or cheese and
oh yeah.
pickle or no lettuce or anything like that.
I've never frozen a sandwich.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But I think I'm going to try it.
Yeah, you'll have to get back to me on that.
Yeah, yeah,
I think because my sandwiches aren't all hot or all cold. So I wonder if that's why, like if I make
yeah.
a, you'd have to make it without the lettuce and the,
Yes,
tomatoes. So
yeah.
maybe just having that part like ready to go. I like that though.
I think I'm going to try that, and then because it would be really handy to be able to get that out and then quickly cook it in the oven, right? Because it's quite thin, so it will cook
Hmm.
reasonably quickly from the frozen
Yeah.
state. You don't really want to defrost it per se, right? So
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's, I think that kind of thinking is
yeah,
really what you can put over anything that you have in your house
sure.
to that, would make it easier. Like, could it, because a lot of times, like, even if it takes, say, a half an hour to bring, to bake that sandwich, it's hands free. It's not involved. It's
Yeah,
just time. So you can get home, put that in, do whatever else you need to do, and then it's done. So it's like that hands off time. We can make use of that as well, as opposed to like the active cooking time.
I'm going to experiment with this because I'm thinking about the toasted sandwiches, putting them into a sandwich toaster and then just close. I wonder if you can do that from frozen for further experimentation for sure.
Part two.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So any other tips and tricks regarding this preparing and planning of one's meals?
Yeah. So when we talked about prepping the ingredients and storing them separately,
Yes,
what that can allow you to do is build your own meals. So one of the complaints I get from families a lot is like, I would meal prep, but my family doesn't like the same thing. So I end up making this meal and that meal because my husband and my older daughter and my younger son. So when you prep and you store things individually, start thinking about build your own meals. So things like sandwiches, pasta, tacos, wraps, bowls, like you can just put the ingredients out ready to go and your
yes,
family
yep,
can build
yep.
their own. And this is like been a lifesaver in my family, but also
Okay.
in so many families that I work with because parents are tired. Like there's already 21 meals in the week. Like why do we need to like triple or quadruple that because our family's not eating the same thing? So a build your own meal would allow you
Yeah,
to just set out
I get
the
that. Yeah.
ingredients and then people take what they want. So that's one tip that I would encourage families to think about, especially if they're making like multiple meals, like for one meal. The other thing to think about is what I call kitchen clean out meals. So the recipes that make use of that, like we have to use that little drawer that you have, the perishable ingredients that need to be used. So things like egg scrambles, soups, stews, chilies, bowls, wraps, fried rice. Like I've made fried rice with 7 different vegetables and I've made
Sure.
it with like onions and peas because that's all I had.
Yep.
So have some of those in mind because especially if you go maybe like week at a time, that those days, before you go to the store, you might be left with like, well, I have a red pepper, I have a carrot, and I have some rice. So start thinking about kitchen clean out meals that can make use of whatever you have. So that's another thing I think that would be really helpful. Keeping an ongoing shopping list was like the biggest game changer. Like when you're getting low on something, especially the things that you use all the time, the pantry staples, is keep that ongoing shopping list throughout the week. So have it on your fridge, have it somewhere
Yep.
visible when you're getting low on something rather than, okay, I'm going to go shopping on Saturday. I wake up and now I've got to remember and go through my whole kitchen and try to like remember what's not there.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to remember that you need soy sauce if it's not there. So ongoing shopping list can be really helpful. So those are a couple of the tips and tricks that will make it hopefully easier for you.
Fantastic. Well, you've given me quite a few ideas today, and my head's spinning with this idea of the frozen toasted sandwiches now. So thank you
I
very much,
have to
Jill.
know. You have to get back to me on this one.
I'll take some pictures for you.
Okay, perfect.
Jill, thank you very much for joining us once again at Good Food Revolution. We look forward to catching up with you next month.
Sounds good. Bye,
Thanks.
Jamie.
Bye for now.